and denied this black woman first class. What happened next shocked the crew. A black woman stepped into the first-class cabin, proud and certain of her right, yet every gaze pierced through her like a verdict, guilty for the color of her skin and her simple outfits. The first-class cabin fell silent the moment she walked in, a woman whose presence carried both quiet grace and undeniable strength, yet in the eyes of some, her skin told a different story. Amina Diallo, dark-skinned, West African, elegant in a tailored dress that spoke of dignity, not wealth. She held her boarding pass firmly, but the whispers came like daggers. Are you sure she belongs here? First class? Impossible. No one questioned the sharp-suited man sipping whiskey. No one doubted the blonde woman arranging her designer bag. But for Amina, every step down that narrow aisle was a trial, her existence in that space treated as an intrusion. At the door stood Camilla Whitmore, lead attendant, her polished smile faltering into suspicion. She scanned the ticket once, twice, her eyes narrowing as though ink and paper could not possibly confirm what stood before her. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, watching, waiting. The tension was no longer about a seat on a plane, it was about who was allowed to rise, who was allowed to belong. In that charged silence, America's oldest wound reopened. Race, class, and the fragile illusion of equality. This was no ordinary flight. Before wheels touched the sky, the cabin would become a battlefield, and every spectator would be forced to choose a side. The cabin of first class was already a stage before she entered. Crystal glasses caught the light like prisms, champagne fizzed in delicate streams, and the faint hum of wealth vibrated in every polished surface. Reclined in leather seats were men with cufflinks carved from onyx, women draped in pearls and perfume so thick it clung to the air. Conversations were hushed, laughter restrained, everything here whispered, "This is not a place for everyone." Then the door opened, and Amina Diallo stepped inside. For a second, the hum of the cabin broke. Heads tilted, eyes shifted. An invisible current snapped through the room, subtle but undeniable, like the intake of breath before a storm. She was not draped in jewels. Her dress was navy, modest, its fabric flowing with a quiet elegance. A scarf rested on her shoulders, woven in the intricate patterns of Ghanaian craft. Beautiful, yes, but out of place in this curated theater of luxury. She carried herself with dignity, chin lifted, gaze forward. And that dignity, simple and unadorned, was enough to ignite the whispers. "Is she lost?" hissed a man in a tailored suit, lowering his newspaper just enough to study her. "She doesn't look first class," murmured a woman heavy with pearls, her lips curling into something too sharp to be a smile. The whispers multiplied, a chain reaction of judgment disguised as curiosity, until the entire cabin buzzed with the same question: what is she doing here? From the aisle's far end, sharp heels struck the floor with military rhythm. Camilla Whitmore, chief attendant, appeared as if summoned by the collective suspicion. Every detail of her presence screamed precision: hair twisted into a perfect bun, uniform crisp with gold trim, lips painted a red so bold it commanded obedience. She stopped in front of Amina, her smile professional but her eyes flickering with contempt. "Ma'am," she said, her voice clear enough for the whole cabin, "this section is reserved for first-class passengers." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. For a heartbeat, the passengers waited not for Amina's answer, but for her retreat. Instead, Amina reached into her bag, pulled out her boarding pass, and extended it with steady hands. The slip bore the unmistakable mark, first class. Camilla took it delicately, pinched between manicured fingers as if even the paper might contaminate her. She studied it with exaggerated care, tilting it under the cabin's soft lights. A frown tugged at her lips, then an arched brow. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured pity. "Perhaps the system entered you incorrectly." The murmurs erupted again, this time louder, laced with cruel amusement. "Happens all the time," the man in the Italian suit said, chuckling. "Economy is chaos these days." The couple in designer jackets smirked. The woman in pearls leaned back, shaking her head as if witnessing a child's folly. Camilla folded the ticket with deliberate precision, then extended it back to Amina with a smile polished, sharp as glass. "I'll be glad to check if there's a more suitable seat further back," she offered, her tone falsely sweet. "You might feel more comfortable there." The word comfortable struck like a whip. Everyone knew what it meant. You don't belong. Amina stood rooted. The heat rising at the back of her neck betrayed nothing on her composed face. Her hand brushed the silver watch on her wrist, a relic from the years she had spent walking these aisles, not as a passenger but as crew. She had poured champagne here, folded blankets, steadied hands during turbulence. She had served these people, invisible. Now she had returned, no longer in uniform, but as their equal, or so she thought. Her gaze traveled the cabin. Every eye seemed sharpened, either gleaming with smug approval or glancing away in discomfort. None welcomed her, none defended her. Camilla leaned closer, her perfume wrapping the air like suffocation. "Please step aside while we resolve this," she ordered, her tone harder now, stripped of pretense. The passengers stirred, restless. A businessman tapped his watch, muttering about meetings. A woman in sapphires clicked her tongue in irritation. A young man grinned as he typed on his laptop, as though this humiliation were free entertainment. Yet Amina did not move. The boarding pass trembled faintly in her hand, but her shoulders remained square, her chin unbowed. The truth was on her side, but truth alone felt fragile against the weight of privilege pressing down on her. The cabin transformed into a theater, every passenger an eager spectator. On one side stood Camilla, gleaming, authoritative, her smile a blade backed by the silent approval of those seated in luxury. On the other stood Amina, quiet, unyielding, armed only with a piece of paper and the certainty that she belonged. For one breathless moment, nothing moved. Even the hum of the engine seemed to still. The clash was not yet physical, but it was inevitable. And no one in that cabin, not even Amina herself, could foresee how this single confrontation would unravel everything they believed about class, color, and worth. The cabin had grown still, yet the silence was not peaceful. It was a silence sharpened to a blade, humming with judgment. Amina remained frozen in the aisle, her boarding pass trembling faintly between her fingers. Camilla stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the authority of someone who believed the space was hers to command. "Madam," she said, her tone measured, her smile brittle, "I'll need to see additional identification. First-class seating is reserved. We can't risk errors." Her words dripped with civility, but beneath them slithered contempt. The man in cufflinks let out a short, derisive laugh. "Additional identification? Of course." He leaned back, folding his arms as if settling in for a performance. Another voice, sharp and laced with boredom, broke in. "She's blocking the aisle. Some of us have places to be." The murmurs spread like fire in dry grass. "She doesn't belong here. Unbelievable. Security should have noticed. I paid $6,000 for this seat." Their voices swirled together, a chorus of entitlement and disdain. And then came the glow, the faint, eerie light of phones being raised, screens tilted to capture her shame. Amina could see the red dots of recording, as if her humiliation needed to be archived, replayed, devoured. Her throat tightened. The scarf around her shoulders felt suddenly heavy, like a tether dragging her into the earth. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, louder than the jet engines beneath. Camilla took the boarding pass from Amina's hand with a practiced snap, as if snatching contraband. She waved another attendant forward, a younger woman with nervous eyes. "Check this, now." The young attendant glanced at the pass, then at Amina. For a flicker of a second, there was sympathy, fragile, human, but it evaporated under Camilla's withering stare. The girl hurried away, clutching the ticket as if it burned. Camilla leaned in close, her perfume sharp, her whisper perfectly pitched to be overheard by those nearest. "Save yourself, dear. Walk back now. Go where you belong." The phrase cut like glass. Go where you belong. It struck Amina not as insult alone, but as history every door closed, every smirk, every lecture about knowing her place. It dragged up nights in cold dormitories when she studied by candlelight because electricity failed, days when professors dismissed her accent as ignorance, flights where she served champagne with a bowed head while passengers pretended she was invisible. And yet here she was, first class, seat 2A, but still, to them, she was a trespasser. The businessman in the Italian suit raised his voice, emboldened by Camilla's disdain. Miss, do us all a favor. Step aside. You're disturbing the cabin. The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. Heads nodded. Agreement spread. Amina lifted her eyes to him, steady, unwavering. No anger, only resolve. A flame banked but unextinguished. The man faltered for half a second, surprised by the depth in her gaze, before scoffing and looking away. The young attendant returned, her hands trembling slightly as she held the boarding pass. She swallowed hard, then spoke. It checks out. She's in 2A. A ripple of discomfort broke across the cabin. Some shifted in their seats, some avoided her eyes, but none apologized. Camilla's smile did not falter. If anything, it sharpened. Well then, she said, her voice thick with sarcasm. If the system insists, so be it. She gestured toward the seat with the precision of a queen dismissing a servant. This way. Amina stepped forward, but each pace was heavy with the weight of dozens of stairs. She felt them slide over her skin like cold steel, each one an accusation. You don't belong, you never will. She lowered herself into the leather of seat 2A, the material cool against her arms. The seatbelt clicked into place, a sound meant to promise safety, but in this moment it felt like shackles locking her into judgment. Camilla leaned in, lowering her voice so that only Amina could hear. Enjoy your flight, she said, her lips curling. It must feel unusual. The words were poison disguised as courtesy. Amina's hand tightened around the armrest until her knuckles blanched. Tears pressed hot against the back of her eyes, demanding release, but she refused. Not here, not before them. The engines roared louder, the cabin lights dimming in golden anticipation of takeoff. For most, it was routine, barely worth a glance. For Amina, it was the crack before the storm, the hush before something greater broke free. And though none of them knew it yet, this was no quiet surrender. This was the spark. The engines droned like a distant storm. Yet inside the first-class cabin, the storm had already erupted. Amina sat rigid, her ticket still clutched in her hand, but the weight of the stairs pressed harder than any seatbelt. She could feel them, Camilla's icy poise, the businessman's disdain, the whispered mockery that crawled across the rows. Every breath burned, every second stretched like a trial without defense. Her mind reached back through years of wounds carved by the same blade. She remembered the customs officer in London who inspected her passport as though it dripped with lies. She remembered the woman in Paris clutching her purse tighter when Amina entered the train car. And now, here, at 30,000 feet, the jury of strangers once again declared her unworthy, her only crime the color of her skin, the cadence of her accent, the fabric of her scarf. The cabin's quiet was not peace. It was the silence of complicity. Amina's chest rose. She unclasped her belt, the metallic snap slicing the hush. The businessman beside her flinched, eyes narrowing. What do you think you're doing? She rose. Her figure, tall and steady, filled the narrow aisle. Dozens of eyes followed, phones lifted, ready to capture her as spectacle, not story. Camilla's lips curled in a smile honed from years of superiority. Is there an issue? She asked, her tone dripping with mock courtesy. Yes, Amina said. Her voice carried across the cabin, clear, unshaken. The issue is the disease of racism that still poisons these skies. The words cracked open the silence. Murmurs rippled. Some scoffed, some froze. Camilla stiffened. Ma'am, this is exactly the place. Amina cut her short, her voice rising like a tide. Right here, where you all watched a woman accused not by evidence but by melanin, where laughter was easier than courage, where silence protected cruelty. She scanned the cabin, her gaze fierce. When you saw me step into this seat, what did you see? A thief? An imposter? Someone who didn't belong? Not one of you asked who I was. You decided. Because in your eyes, a black woman in first class is always a question mark, always a threat, never the answer. The young attendant lowered her phone, shame flushing her cheeks. A man coughed, shifting uncomfortably. Amina pressed on, her words cutting sharper. Do you know what it takes to reach this seat? I washed trays, I scrubbed aisles, I bent my back so others could sip champagne and toss crumbs without seeing me. I built a foundation from the ground so girls in villages like mine would not have to kneel to ignorance. And yet, in this cabin, none of that mattered. My skin shouted louder than my story, my accent buried deeper than my worth. Camila tried to interject, but Amina's hand lifted, silencing her. Her eyes blazed. You told me to go back where I belong. Tell me, where is that? In the shadows? In poverty you imagine for every African face? Back in the kitchens you think we never left? Or is it here, paid in full, earned with sweat and sacrifice? You want me gone because I break the picture in your head, because my presence dismantles the lie that only whiteness is worthy. A hush, heavy as thunderclouds, smothered the cabin. Some passengers turned away, guilty. Others stared, shaken. Her voice deepened, almost breaking. Racism is not loud slurs alone. It is the smirk of a flight attendant questioning my right to sit. It is the laughter that echoes when a black woman is humiliated. It is the silence of those who know better but stay still. It kills in slow breaths, in small humiliations, until dignity is strangled. She paused, her eyes glistening but unyielding. But tonight I refuse. You will not strip me of dignity at 30,000 feet. You will not write me into your small story of inferiority. I belong not because you allow me, but because I earned it, because my existence needs no permission. A crack opened in the wall of silence. A woman in red leaned forward, voice trembling. She's right. Another passenger swallowed hard, muttering, We were wrong. The businessman dropped his gaze, his jaw locked but wordless. Camila's smile dissolved, her authority unraveling before the eyes of her own cabin. Amina returned to her seat, slow, regal, her silence now blazing stronger than any outcry. Around her, the cabin was transformed, not yet redeemed, but unsettled, fractured, forced to see what it had denied. Outside the window, the night stretched endless and dark, but inside, a fire had been lit, not of destruction, but of reckoning. The plane had barely touched down at JFK when the world erupted. Phones still warm in passengers' hands had already launched the firestorm. Grainy clips, shaky voices. Camila's venomous smirk, Go back where you belong, looped across millions of screens. And there she was, Amina, standing tall, her voice trembling yet unbreakable. Why did it cut so deep? Why did one sentence pierce like a knife? Because everyone watching had either heard it before or feared they might someday. Because it wasn't just Camila's voice, it was the echo of centuries, packed into 8 words. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Number she belongs. Number races in the skies. Number Amina speaks. What began as whispers in a cabin became a roar shaking cities. Anchors interrupted their broadcasts. Commentators argued on split screens. Some applauded her courage. Others squirmed. Was it really racism? Was it just a misunderstanding? But could anyone deny what their eyes had seen, what their ears had heard? Camila's life unraveled in real time. Sponsors gone, invitations canceled. Her carefully polished image lecturer, cultural ambassador, woman of grace shattered overnight. What did that smile hide all these years? How many rooms had laughed at her jokes, not realizing the cruelty simmering beneath? How long had privilege shielded her from consequence? Now cameras replayed her downfall frame by frame. And Amina, she never asked to be a symbol, yet here she was, thrust under blinding lights. Reporters camped outside her Harlem apartment. Children slipped drawings into her mailbox. Little girls with brown skin and wide smiles, holding signs that read, We belong. Emails flooded her nonprofit from Lagos, from Detroit. From women whispering, Thank you. You spoke what we never dared. But with love came doubt. Headlines twisted her into archetypes. Saint, troublemaker, opportunist. Was she a heroine? Was she a victim? Or simply a woman who had enough? She faced cameras anyway, her scarf steady on her shoulders, her voice sharp enough to slice through noise. This is not just about me, she told the nation. It is about every person who's been told they are less. Silence has never saved us. Did the audience hear her, truly hear her, or did they just consume her pain like another viral clip, soon to be replaced by the next scandal? In Times Square, her face towered on digital billboards, replaying the moment she refused to shrink. People pointed, applauded. A little black girl clutched her mother's hand. "That's her," she whispered, awe spilling from her eyes. "That's the lady who said we belong." Amina bent down, voice soft but unshakable. "Yes, and so do you." And in that instant, the chaos of neon and horns fell away. This wasn't just news. It was history folding forward. Meanwhile, Camila sat alone in her gilded apartment, curtains drawn against the noise outside. Once she had basked in applause, in invitations, in privilege. Now she scrolled through comments like knives. Some defended her. She didn't mean it. Others cut deeper. You revealed yourself. Was this who she had always been? Or had one slip of the tongue unmasked what she never dared admit, even to herself? But the storm raged beyond these two women. Airline summoned to Congress. Protesters flooding airports with chants of "We belong in the skies." Families carrying signs. Students walking out. Activists demanding not apologies but reform. Could the system change? Or would it wait, silent, until the next Amina stood in the aisle and refused to disappear? Questions hung heavy, impossible to ignore. How many Aminas had been silenced before cameras were everywhere? How many Camilas still walked unchecked, their poison disguised as charm? How many flights, how many classrooms, how many offices carried the same unspoken cruelty? The storm exposed everything. The venom, the dignity, the silence, the roar. A mirror had been held up at 30,000 feet, and the reflection was undeniable, ugly, raw, necessary. And still, when the headlines moved on, when hashtags dimmed, Amina walked back to her community. Her fight was not for fame. It was for the nameless girls who might never trend, whose dignity deserved protection anyway. She carried their stories now, their hope, their belonging. The skies had changed. Not enough, not yet, but enough that silence would never feel safe again. The hall erupted, not with the chaos of outrage this time, but with the thunder of vindication. Amina stood beneath the blinding lights, shoulders squared, her voice carrying across the auditorium like a drumbeat that refused to be ignored. What began as pain had turned into fire, and what once was humiliation now burned as triumph. "Do you hear me?" she cried, her accent steady, resonant, undeniable. "We belong. Not tomorrow, not if you allow us, not with conditions. We belong here, now, always." The crowd roared. People stamped their feet. Fists pumped the air. For once, the voices that had been silenced for centuries were not just heard, they shook the walls. And every person in that room felt it in their bones. This was not just her victory, it was theirs. News cameras panned across faces streaked with tears, across children grinning with pride, across elders who had fought too long and finally saw justice standing tall in human form. And then came the moment everyone had waited for. On the screen behind Amina flashed a headline: "Camila Whitmore removed from airline board under investigation for discrimination." The room exploded again. Gasps turned into laughter, then applause so wild it rattled the rafters. People embraced, strangers high-fived. It was as if the universe itself had answered, finally, with a resounding yes. Because wasn't this what justice should look like? The arrogant unmasked, the cruel unseated, the powerful stripped of their untouchable armor, the mighty brought low not by vengeance, but by truth. Amina didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence in that moment was louder than any insult Camila had ever hurled. Instead, she leaned toward the microphone, eyes fierce yet tender. "Tonight is not about her fall," she said, "but about our rise. She is one woman, we are millions, and we are done kneeling." The cheer that followed shook the room. People wept not from sorrow, but from release, the kind that comes when years of swallowed rage finally burst free. A man in the crowd shouted, "Say it again." And Amina did. "We belong." The room echoed back, thousands of voices pounding like a drumline. We belong. For a moment, it wasn't just a speech. It was an anthem, a declaration, a chain breaking in real time. Reporters scrambled to capture it, but the story was already alive, far bigger than ink or broadcast. In living rooms across America, families leaned closer to their screens, hearts racing. Children saw a mirror of themselves and believed, maybe for the first time, that the world could be theirs. Elders whispered prayers of gratitude, their battles not forgotten, finally honored. And for those who had doubted, who had excused cruelty as just words or a misunderstanding, there was no escape. The truth was undeniable. It had unfolded live before the world. As the night grew on, chants filled the streets outside. Justice, dignity, belonging. It wasn't a protest anymore. It was a celebration. People danced, sang, lifted banners, not of anger, but of triumph. Amina stepped down from the stage into a sea of hands, reaching to touch her, to thank her, to tell her, you didn't just speak for yourself, you spoke for all of us. And in that electric moment, she smiled not with bitterness, but with the radiant peace of someone who has carried a mountain and finally set it down. The scars remained, yes. The pain could not be erased. But pain had been transformed into power and humiliation into history. Camila's name would fade, but Amina's would rise, carried on the lips of children chanting, we belong. And the audience, those in the hall, those watching from afar, felt it. The satisfaction, the vindication, the sweet, undeniable justice. For once, the story ended not with despair, not with compromise, but with victory that tasted like freedom. The curtain fell, but no one moved. They wanted to stay in this feeling, this rare, perfect union of rage released and dignity restored. They wanted to remember it, to hold it, to carry it back to their own lives. And they knew, with a thrill that made their hearts race, they had just witnessed not only a fight, but a triumph that belonged to them all. She sat tall in that first-class seat, not as a guest, but as a rightful owner of her space. The stares, the whispers, the judgment, none could erase the truth of who she was. Her silence became louder than words. I belong here. We belong here. This is the reality of racism. Sometimes it doesn't shout. It lingers in the subtle doubts, in the piercing glances, in the way dignity is tested over and over again. And yet, Amina's story is a reminder to every one of us. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is simply refusing to shrink, refusing to move aside, refusing to apologize for existing. So as you walk away from this story, ask yourself, how many Aminas have you crossed paths with? How many chances have you had to stand up, to speak, to make someone feel they truly belong? The fight against prejudice begins in small moments, moments where empathy becomes action. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched your heart, let it travel further. Give it a like to show your support for dignity. Share it so more voices can join. And leave a comment. Your perspective matters more than you know. And if you want more stories like this, stories that confront injustice and celebrate resilience, don't forget to subscribe by subscribing to our channel. From my heart to yours, thank you for watching, for listening, for caring. May your days be filled with kindness, your nights with peace, and may we all learn to see each other beyond the labels. Until the next story.